Pixel Therapy is a member of the But Why Though podcast network.
Go to butwhythoughpodcast.com for an inclusive geek community offering pop culture news, reviews, and podcasts.
Hi, I'm Chris Guthrie, and I'm the host of the Roll for Equality podcast. We're an LGBTQ+ and woman-led show that uses history for character inspiration by telling stories about badass historical people and how to make them into a PC or NPC for your campaigns, with class, race, and background suggestions. We also do interviews and discussions about our experiences as women at the game table, social issues, and advice to help give a platform to women and non-binary players of every variety. There are plenty of laughs, drinks, hijinks, and more here at Roll for Equality, and we would love for you, however you identify, to come join in the fun and camaraderie. The Roll for Equality podcast. Give us a listen on major podcast platforms, and happy adventuring.
That was also our New Year's Eve party.
Okay, we're in good company then. Like, everyone's like a little basic, but in a way that's like, you know, it's fine. Like, I'm drinking a McCafe coffee right now.
Yeah,
like,
we need basic right now.
There's no standards here. Like, it's all comfort.
Welcome to Pixel Therapy, the video game podcast where we look at the games we play through the lens of the player, where what you play is just as important as how you play it, and where emotional intelligence is a critical stat. Every other week, we bring on a guest who may or may not consider themselves a gamer to discuss the games that have made them and change them, and all the feelings they have about our favorite pastime. I'm your co-host, Jamie, pronouns she, her.
And I am your co-host, Spencer, pronouns they, them. And okay, I'm sorry, pause. I just want to mention, I thought it might be a good time to remind people why we share our pronouns, just because, I think there's intention around it. And it's also like, it's important to us to share our pronouns just because I think when you don't, because of how homogenous gaming media can be, there can almost be an assumption of like, oh, they must be, I don't know, two women or whatever. Like, we have all sorts of perceptions about the people we're hearing, and also, what we see around us influences like how we interpret media, especially when there's no visual, like it's just a podcast. Mm-hmm. But that being said, like me disclosing my pronouns at the beginning of the episode is simply that. It's simply a way for me to let you know how I preferred you to think of me or address me. But if I didn't share my pronouns, that's valid too. And there should be no expectation put on anyone to, like, you don't owe your identity to anybody else. I just say that because I've just seen some conversations happening in like queer and trans Twitter lately about how if you don't put your pronouns in your bio, or you don't say your pronouns when you introduce yourself, does that mean that you're hiding your gender, or that you're not sure what your gender is? And I think that this idea of people who don't immediately disclose to you how you need to understand them being hiding themselves or being deceitful, at its core, it's just kind of a homophobic sentiment. I think that it, again, tries to put queerness into the same boxes that we put binary genders into, or trying to explain queerness and transness in terms that belong to white supremacy or hetero-cis normativity. And so I just kind of want to separate those concepts a bit. If folks have questions, like, you can feel free to email us or let me know, tag us on Twitter, tag us on Instagram. But I just want to say that us introducing our pronouns is just a way for us to make that visible. But you don't ever owe anyone an explanation, and your gender is totally up to you, and it can change at any time. So my pronouns are they, them.
And I guess I'll just add, as like someone who's cisgender, like for me, I feel very comfortable sharing my pronouns. And so I feel like I kind of have a responsibility to set that precedent and help normalize it as a thing that people do, regardless of whether they're cisgender or not, so that folks who aren't cisgender can hopefully feel more comfortable sharing their authentic pronouns in a given space. So I think it's important to normalize it too. And everything you said about like not everyone has to feel comfortable doing it is totally valid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I think now that we've come up on a year now that we've been fully Zoom, it's felt at the beginning like sharing all of our pronouns, regardless of whether you were trans or cis, felt really progressive. And it felt like we were bringing visibility and diversity into like my very corporate office space. But now that we've gone this fully remote year and I've had to start every conversation by disclosing that I'm probably the only person in the room who's trans, by saying they, them, it started to feel a little objectifying, if I'm being honest. Like I find myself almost feeling like I'm reduced to the fact that I am a they, them. I'm a publicly visible they, them. And so, you know, it's a nuanced conversation. It's something that I think I'll be thinking about and musing about and probably bringing up again. But just wanted to take a little space to chat about that with folks because there's no one way to be trans. And even if other trans people are saying things like, if you don't share your pronouns, you must not be trans or you must be hiding your gender. Even if that's coming from another trans person, that doesn't mean that it should influence your understanding of your own transness or how you want to disclose that to others. It's your choice.
100%.
Anyway, Jamie, what is this? Where are we?
No, thank you for that little PSA in the middle of our intro. This is Pixel Therapy, though, in case you just clicked download on this thing and had no clue what it was. Hello, hi, Pixel Therapy. We're a video game podcast. We're a video game podcast, and we will absolutely interrupt that to have a detailed conversation about pronouns. So welcome to our space. We wanted to kick off today with a big ol' thank you because we hit a huge milestone this week. Pixel Therapy has officially been downloaded 10,000 plus times.
What?
I can't even wrap my head around that. We've only been here since, September 2020?
It's been 6 months, 15 episodes, or six. This is our 16th episode. 42 countries, according to our host. I just thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We've talked in the past, you know, this podcast is a lot of work, stuff like that, but it's also a lot of fun. And I'm aware of like how much of a privilege it is that we get to do this and that people are listening, that 10,000 times someone clicked download on one of our episodes. It's a huge privilege. I often don't feel like I deserve it, but I'm humbled and grateful for everyone who's hit that download button in the past 6 months. Thank you so much.
Y'all rock. Thanks for choosing to be here week after week. Let's keep going. I'm excited to see. Like 20K feels insane, but hey, like maybe that'll happen someday.
Yeah. Where are we going to be 6 months from now, right?
Yeah. What? Jamie and I have some exciting plans this year. We want to start Twitch streaming. First, we need to save money to buy a computer.
Yeah, first step is like, I need an office. Right now, I do this from a card table I set up in my living room. And so step one, at the end of the month, my partner and I are moving and I'm going to have an actual office space, which I'm so excited. But yeah, we're on our way towards bigger and also
same
things.
I podcast from my living room studio where my partner is currently doing yoga behind me. So, you know, it's just multifunctional, real WeWork energy going on in here.
Absolutely. But yeah, we wanted to mark the milestone. It's important to celebrate. It's important to celebrate accomplishments in your life. For me personally, it's so easy to overlook positive stuff. I get so focused on like what's not going right that even when something exciting happens, I'm just like, that's expected. That's supposed to happen. That was part of the plan. So we don't need to like give it any time. But it's important to take the time and say, hey, this is really cool. And you know, we didn't do it without all of you. So
that's
thank
right.
you.
And oh my gosh, to what you just said, okay, this is the last thing. I think to your point, like it's really easy to look around in the gaming space, which is full of so many innovative, creative, talented, hilarious, special people, and look and be like, oh my God, their community, their audience, they've been doing this for so long. All of these things that come up and make you think, oh my God, why am I coming back and doing this every day? But it's not as often that I stop and actually take stock of, but what are the things that we have achieved that if you had asked me 6 months ago, I never would have even pictured that this would have happened. And if you and I, Jamie, had never like started this, we just would have seen this. So yeah, it's just important to be thankful for what's going on in our present. So yeah, just y'all rock and we love you and we just want to keep doing this.
Yeah. Next up in new and noteworthies, don't forget we've got a bonus.
Speaking of,
if you want to continue to help us out, don't forget we've got bonus episodes for you over on Patreon for just $2 a month. Last month in February, Spencer and I chatted about our all-time favorite video game crushes. And for the month of March, we're doing a 2021 game preview that's got a unique surprise format. You'll have to check it out. That's going to be coming to Patreon in the next couple of weeks, and you're not going to want to miss it. So please go to patreon.com/pixeltherapypod and subscribe at that $2 tier or above to check those bonus episodes out. They're a lot of fun, if I do say so myself. I might be biased.
Unhinged too.
little unhinged.
Unplugged, untucked.
Yeah. Untucked.
Oh, but yeah, even if you don't support, we love you for listening. No worries. Of course. Thank you.
All right, that's enough of that. It is time to get cozy, pull up an armchair, and feel free to lie down on your couch. We're going to talk about our feelings. Spencer, what are you playing?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Well, I just want to mention, I'm not going to say anything about it because I can't. But as y'all know, we are part of the But Why Though podcast network, and butwhythough.com is also a oh my gosh, what are words? It's a media, like articles, news. It's a website with articles and interesting content about gaming, anime, manga, etc. I can't talk this morning. However, something really exciting is that one of the games I'm currently playing is one that hasn't come out yet. It's called Olive Town: Story of Seasons, coming to the Nintendo Switch. So I'm excited to talk about that with you a little bit later. But I just want to mention that if people like farming games and you miss Harvest Moon, you want some new Stardew Valley, like might want to mark your calendar for the end of March because Olive Town: Story of Seasons coming to the Switch. Anyway, I just wanted to it's crazy to me that someone sent me a video game that hasn't come out yet and that I get to play it and then write about it. Like that's just like my 12-year-old self is screaming right now.
Yeah.
So that's happening. But another game that I decided, just a little palate cleanser. I decided to pick up Firewatch, which is a game that came out a few years ago, 2016. They're by the developer's called Campo Santo. I think famously people describe it as a walking simulator, which it is. Like most of the actions you take in the game are walking around the Shoshone National Park in Colorado, I believe, or maybe California. I'm sorry, I'm bad at geography.
Wyoming?
Oh, Wyoming?
Shoshone National Forest is in Wyoming.
Oops. Okay. Sorry, Wyoming. I'm really sorry. I'm like, national parks, all that exists. It's my coastal elite coming out. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no. There it is. There's that coastal elite.
I know. I'm such an ass. Anyway. Okay. So Firewatch. Wow. What can I say about this game? I haven't finished it yet. I'm about halfway through. It's not a long game. I think you can finish it in under 10 hours. So I'm probably like 4 hours in. But the game, I would say the style is cartoonish, semi-realistic, but with sort of softened edges, really natural, earthy tones. And essentially you play as Henry, a man who's gone through a really traumatic life change where his partner, who he'd been with for several years is affected by early onset dementia. So the person that he's loved for years has become unrecognizable, and he also isn't able to take care of her anymore, which I think is something that can be really hard to accept, especially in a romantic relationship when your partners, and the idea that there's some ways that you can't be there as a caregiver. I think it's important to remember that caregiving can be really hard. And I think this game, one of the things that resonates with so many people is that it's so, what's the word? Earnest, authentic. Like, it really is unflinching in showing the full spectrum of emotions that someone might go through when going through a traumatic event. I think a lot of video games really lean into this heroic narrative of, oh, all these terrible things happen to the main character, but they overcame and they have just an unending optimism, and nothing really gets them down. It's only temporary. But I think Firewatch, like right from the beginning, just the circumstances around why Henry comes to work at the park, he's really kind of escaping from his home life, coming to work at this national forest over the summer, where he is a volunteer who basically camps out of a watchtower that's put in the park to look out for smoke from wildfires, as well as keep an eye on controlled burns that fire people do set up, rangers set up to keep the forest ecosystem working smoothly. So even from the beginning, like the circumstances around what brought him there, like you could sense that in some ways this person is running away, and that's a little bit of a different. It was a unique kind of. Like, I didn't know if I liked Henry in the beginning of the game. And that was just a really new experience for me. But the game is really, you're alone a lot of the time. It's a game about loneliness. It's a game about space. And I think that really the core of the game is the interactions that Henry is having over a walkie-talkie with his supervisor named Delilah, who you... have not seen, and I'm assuming may not, possibly they never meet throughout the game. But because he's alone, and because his only lifeline is this walkie-talkie with this voice at the other end, she is his boss, so she's giving him instructions, but they're also talking. They're like the only two people in this park for stretches of time. And it just, I think what's striking me is just how the cinematic choice, like the cinematography, the music, and the way that Delilah's voice really becomes a fully fleshed character. Like, even though you never see her or never exist in space with her, you can really feel the ways in which, she becomes a lifeline for Henry. Like, her approval of him or his interpretation of her tone really touches on the insecurity, the fragility that the state that he's in, the different answers, it's a sim, like you have conversations with Delilah and you can choose an answer. So, like, for example, she was talking to Henry early in the game, and then she's interrupted by a phone call, and she's like, hold on, I'll be right back with you. When she gets back online, you have a couple options of dialogue. Like, she'll be like, hey, I'm back. And you can say, oh, like, no problem. Like, what were we talking about? Or you can say, who was that? Why were you, like, where did you go? Who were you talking to? Since this was a mystery game, I'll admit I was like, oh, maybe I should pick the who were you talking to one, because I don't know if I can trust this person. And when you say that, she's like, whoa, like, I don't owe you an explanation. Like, I'm going to hang up for a while. And you don't hear from her for a day. And it's like, that hurts too, because you realize how alone you're really dependent on this person to come talk to you. So it really highlights the interesting power dynamic between Delilah and Henry, and just that walkie-talkie and waiting for it to buzz, or the pregnant pauses between saying something and waiting for a response. Like, it just does a great job of kind of recreating what it's like in real life when you're kind of forming these intense relationships with someone. especially in the age of the pandemic where we're all isolated. It kind of feels a bit like that too. Interpreting tone over distance, just a really rich narrative experience. I know you've played it, Jamie. Like, do you remember your playthrough much?
Oh yeah, Firewatch has got to be up there as like one of my favorite gaming experiences of all time. I think for me it was a really interesting evolution of what like Gone Home did. Have you played Gone Home?
No, I want to though.
Okay, I think if you get into Firewatch, I would say check out Gone Home. Gone Home came out first. It's a different developer. Gone Home is Fulbright. Firewatch is Campo Santo. But it felt like an evolution of the way Gone Home was trying to tell a story. I will say a few things with Firewatch. The acting in it, particularly, Henry and Delilah, is so fucking good. Henry's played by is it Rich Sommer? Is that how you say his name? He's from Mad Men and a variety of other things. So he's a prominent like character actor on TV. Rich Sommer. That's who plays Henry. And Sissy Jones, who does Delilah, she's popped up in a lot of video games. But I really feel like
oh my god, he played Harry Crane on Mad Men.
There you go. Yeah,
I know that guy.
yeah, that's him. So their acting really grounds the entire experience of the game for me. I'll be interested to hear what you have to say when you finish the game. I think I love the experience of the game, but was a little disappointed with some of the narrative choices they made with the ending.
Okay.
In a way that I wasn't with Gone Home. So I think, as far as like comparing these two games to each other, but I love the dynamic of Henry and Delilah and their conversations. And I agree with everything you've said about the atmosphere that the game creates, which I would also chalk up to the Chris Remo, who did the soundtrack for the game. The soundtrack for Firewatch is on Spotify, and that's some great background music for your day. Really good. And another reason I tie this game to Gone Home, Chris Remo also did the soundtrack for Gone Home, which also has phenomenal music. And I totally agree. Like, I don't, at least at the beginning of the game, like, and maybe even by the end, like, I don't know if I liked Henry, but I understood him. And I understood why he was doing what he was doing, but he is kind of running away. And they kind of leave it up to you to decide how you want to paint that, like what he's allowed to do in this situation. Like, is he abandoning his partner, or is it fair for him to take this space,
right? Like
for himself and like process what he's going through too. I don't know. I might feel differently about it now than I did when I originally played it. At the time, I remember thinking he was being kind of selfish. But I also don't know how I would act in that situation. It's a really tough situation to be in.
Yeah. And I think that's excellent. Like how it really forces you to slow down and really question those judgments you may make at the beginning of the game, because through the time that you're spent in his head and reliving his memories, I don't know, it kind of makes you consider something that for a lot of folks, maybe they hadn't thought about before. And what you said about the music, like I think what is just so striking is how there's really not much going on in the game. Like you're walking through the forest, you're checking supply boxes that were left by other rangers and hikers, you're clearing brush, doing things like that, stamping out old campfires. But what becomes an initial response to what Delilah and Henry think are some kids setting off fireworks in the park and him going and dispersing them, putting those fires out, becomes a much bigger, creepier mystery. And they're able to achieve, like, you're just trying to figure out what's going on. Like, someone's watching the two of you. You find some strange object. Someone breaks into the tower where you're sleeping. And you're trying to just piece together what the F is going on, because you're in this remote forest. You can't really just call the cops. And so just the way it builds that suspense with perfectly timed music and perfectly cut shots. And of course, the acting between Henry and Delilah, like it creates something really unique. So yeah, I'm excited to reach the end. But more on that. What are you playing, Jamie?
So a few episodes ago, I talked about this little game that I started called 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim.
It's a little game.
Just a little game, little like 60-ish hour game. Well, I finished 13 Sentinels, and goddamn, Spencer, that's a good fucking game.
Oh, man.
I feel like it's going to be another one of those games where like the game comes out the year before it gets buzzed, but I don't manage to play it, and so I play it at the start of the following year. So then like it'll be one of my games of the year this year, even though it technically came out last year. I feel like Outer Wilds was in a similar situation last year. But really fucking cool game. I was really just the way the narrative twists and turns and the way they constantly keep you on your feet. So for folks who may not remember, this is the game made by Vanillaware, published by Atlas. It's about 13 Japanese high schoolers who are caught up in this narrative of epic proportions, the sci-fi narrative of epic proportions. Tons of science fiction tropes appear in the game. There's mechanical kaiju that are attacking the cities. The kids have to get into giant mechs and fight the kaiju. There's time travel. There's space travel. There's cloning. There's colonization of other planets. There's the Matrix, basically.
Oh my God. It really goes everywhere.
There's Terminators, essentially, in the game. Androids, AI, nanobots.
Wow.
The list goes on. And the fact of the matter is that, like, what's impressive about the game, so to play the game, you're experiencing it in kind of two paths. There's a path that is the mech battles, which are played out as turn-based strategy games where you are in your mech and you're fighting the kaiju. You as the player are seeing kind of a top-down view of the city, and you're controlling the kids in their mechs and making them fight the kaiju. And then there's also a path of the game where you play essentially these vignette novel or visual novel scenes where you're seeing kind of the day-to-day life of the characters. You're making some dialogue decisions, but it's more like the story is going to happen the way that it's going to happen, and it has some light adventure elements in that, like, as you have conversations with characters, you unlock certain keywords or key items that then allow you to progress the story with a different character, with that character, in different ways, and kind of piece together this mystery. But the fact that every single one of those vignettes manages to, like, every single time I finished a vignette, I was like, what the fuck? What the fuck? I was just constantly like, oh shit, what the fuck? And they keep that energy through the entire game. There's probably like 20 to 30 hours of the visual novel stuff. And every single scene that you play, you learn something new in the narrative. It's just constantly twisting. It's just twist
together.
Here's the thing, right? It's like watching a balancing act, right? Or like watching like a really intense circus performance where everything's flying and like maybe some guy in the background dropped a ball, but you don't even notice it because everything else is still moving. And I feel like that's the magic of this game, which is that like if I actually got my notebook out and like tried to write this narrative out and like try to piece it all together and make sure it all made sense, I'm not 100% sure that it would all piece together perfectly. There's probably some pieces missing from this puzzle. However, the actual experience of it, they pull you through it so quickly and they're constantly twisting and twisting and twisting. So you can't necessarily keep track of it even if you wanted to. So that by the end, if you just kind of let go and let the water take you, like by the end, the emotional experience and the emotional payoff of the game is so like worth it that I don't even care if I've only got half a puzzle and there's like some puzzle pieces from other puzzles in here and like it doesn't necessarily all make sense as one cohesive thing that I can put on the wall. But I had such a fun time doing it that I don't really care if it doesn't all quite click together.
Yeah. I mean, it's also fascinating because it feels like the type of story that could only be told through a video game.
Yeah, I guess I could maybe see this as some sort of like wild TV show. But I also feel like if it was content like that people could rewatch over and over again and pick apart, then it would fall under that trap of like, oh, this doesn't hold up because I watched this episode 7 times and I wrote everything down and it doesn't actually make sense with the next thing. So I think you're right in the sense that like, it's a visual novel. There's not a ton of interaction in the story. So in terms of like, they're presenting something to you, like that aspect of it could be duplicated, but that kind of like roller coaster, like getting pulled into the current of what's happening and not necessarily having the time or desire to go back and pick it apart, I think is unique to video games, or maybe only comparable to like something that you binge watch on Netflix. But even with something that you binge watch, there's still people who are going to go back and are going to break through all of those episodes, right? But it really did remind me of like a binge watching experience where you just push yourself through something and are like in it for that emotional roller coaster. There's also 2 things that the game does that I think are noteworthy. One is that they have it's still only one character in the game, but I feel like you see this so rarely and stuff like this that, or at least in what I've come into contact with. There's a character in the game who's just fat and she's like just treated as like normal and capable and not like a gross monster.
Yes.
And she's actually like a really sweet character. She's someone she's not one of the main characters, but she's best friends with several of the main characters. Her name is Miwako. And she's just a chubby teenager who likes to get snacks with her friends after school, and she has a crush on all of the boys in her class, and she gets embarrassed around all of them. But everyone thinks that she's a sweetheart. Like all of her friends are just like, they're constantly looking out for her, and you're really invested in whether or not Miwako makes it through the story. And that was cool to see. And I just think in general in games and media, we don't see fat characters presented with humanity. So it was just cool to see Miwako there, being a fat teenager and like living her life, and
love that. Her
weight's not commented on or anything. Like she's just another person in the school, and it's not like they don't show her. She likes to get snacks after school with her friends, but her friends who are both the like, pencil thin typical anime characters,
anime protagonists.
They both are eating the same snacks that she is, and it's not like Miwako's the fat girl who's like sitting here mowing down on all the snacks. I don't know. As a fat person, I appreciated it. Hi friends, it's your co-host Jamie. I've come to tell you that I've made a huge mistake. You see, in this podcast that you're listening to right now, I'm about to start telling Spencer about these 2 characters in 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim, who I was super emotionally invested in when I played the game, but I'm about to get one of the characters' names super duper wrong. The correct names of the 2 characters are Takatoshi Hijiyama, a 1940s Japanese soldier displaced in time, and Tsukasa Okino, a gender-fluid kid genius out to save the world. Unfortunately, in the months since I beat the game, I accidentally got the names swapped around in my head. So throughout our conversation, you're going to hear me refer to the characters instead as Tsukasa and Okino. This is a mistake that I take pretty seriously and that definitely should have been avoided. These characters in this game mean a lot to me. When Spencer and I discussed what we should do about this issue, though, I ultimately wanted to keep the conversation we had in the episode. For one thing, trying to re-record it would have felt inauthentic, and to just cut it and hide it didn't feel right either. So here's our conversation as it happened. To the characters of Hijiyama and Okino, to their creators and writers at Vanillaware, and to you, our Pixel Therapy audience, I'm really sorry for messing this up, and I'm going to try to do better next time. Thanks for listening. Now back to the original recording. And the other thing that they do that I'm so torn. It's like, I want to give them props, but I also don't want to give them props because I think they fucked it up. But they do have a queer relationship in the game.
Oh.
That I was super invested in. Between these 2, this is like kind of some light spoilers, I guess. If you want to play the game and have no context for anything, then bounce out. But there's 2 characters, I guess we'll say guys. Tsukasa, who definitely is he, him, and Okino, who is always pronounced as he, him, but who regularly throughout the game presents as a woman. Like will wear dresses and skirts and present as a woman and use a different name.
Yeah.
Tsukasa is from 1940s Japan. So he's got a lot of bigoted ideals in his head.
Wait, sorry, just for my own.
Yes, go ahead.
So there's like people from different timelines.
There's people from different timelines
in the same timeline together.
Yeah, so the majority of the games take place in the 80s, but there is time travel in this game. Tsukasa is pulled out of 1940s Japan by Okino and brought to 1980s Japan, where he's helping Okino. Okino's a scientist who's trying to figure out why the kaiju are coming.
Okay.
But again, all high schoolers. So
yeah, of course.
He's a boy genius, I guess.
Yeah.
So when Tsukasa first meets Okino in 1940s Japan, Okino is presenting as a young girl and is doing that to like get information, or at least that's what you think at the time, like dressing as a girl to get information. Tsukasa develops a crush on Okino as a girl. They end up coming back to 1980s Japan together. Tsukasa realizes that Okino is actually a guy, and is like he's going through all this shit. Like throughout the game, you play chapters as Tsukasa. Tsukasa's a playable character. Okino's not. So you're in Tsukasa's head a lot more than you're in Okino's. But Tsukasa's like, the game definitely makes you see that he is struggling with the fact that he is bisexual. He is struggling with the fact that he is attracted to Okino, not just when Okino is dressed as a woman, but Okino like as he exists.
Wow.
And that he's got a lot of internalized homophobia because of where he comes from. And so he's dealing with that. And Okino I don't know if this is good or bad, but Okino recognizes that Tsukasa like has feelings for him and is just constantly giving him shit about it. Like constantly like flirting with him and then making fun of Tsukasa when Tsukasa gets embarrassed about it, kind of. So they have this like kind of like, I don't know, it's played off in like a really cute way, but it's, I don't know, it's always just a little like touching.
Sassy twink energy.
Yeah, it's always like touching this wire of like, is this problematic or not? But you're still kind of really rooting for them because Tsukasa's such a himbo. He's just, he's kind of a dummy, but he wears his heart on his sleeve and he's really like, for Japan. He's like, you know, he thinks of himself as like a big hero.
Yeah.
And he wants to protect people. So,
Okino's this annoying power bottom.
Basically, yeah. He's like constantly giving him shit. But the thing that they do, so like it's made clear that Okino just likes to dress as a woman sometimes, and like he's doing it in situations where it's not advantageous to getting information or anything like that. He's just doing it sometimes. But every time he does it, they make this like weird, like he plays it up with Tsukasa in a way that I didn't think was necessarily appropriate, where like Tsukasa's getting embarrassed because he's attracted to Okino and Okino's like making fun of him. I'm like, okay. And they kind of, I don't know, sometimes they just make it too much about like the genitals that I felt like was inappropriate. But what
Can you give an example?
Well, there's an example. I'm going to have to spoil it to give an example.
Okay. We'll put tag in the show notes when the spoilers are.
We'll tag this in the show notes. These are deep spoilers for 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. You learn that everything that's happening in the game is happening in a future society, and all of the characters in the game are clones of people who set up this future society. Humanity has died out, and they have created this giant spaceship that's floating through space that has 5 biomes in it set in different time periods. So 1940s Japan and 1980s Japan are existing at the same time. They're just different biomes in this spaceship.
What?
The rest of humanity is dead. These 13 kids that you're playing as are the only ones that are left. And everyone else that they see in the world it's like the Matrix.
Why? What's the point?
The people who came before, who set all this up, they were trying to preserve humanity.
Oh, I see. Okay,
humanity had killed itself off, so they were trying to preserve humanity.
A time capsule.
Yeah, basically. They were sending them out into the space in the hopes that they would find a planet and be able to start over again, right?
Yeah. But instead, they all turned gay.
well, just Tsukasa. And Okino. Because that's the other thing the game does. Like at the end of the game, literally all of the characters are paired up in heterosexual couplings to like make babies start the world over again. Right?
Of course.
Except for Tsukasa and Okino. So, these are the things that we deal with.
Damn.
So as Tsukasa and Okino are going through their story, they're finding things that they think are from the future and you think are from the future until you realize that these are recordings of the people that they're cloned from in the past because they're seeing older versions of themselves and thinking that's them in the future, but it's actually the people they're cloned from in the past, right? So this game is just mindfuck on top of mindfuck. It just folds these mindfucks in. And so you're constantly, just sitting there like, what? Anyway. So Tsukasa finds this video file of him, of like what he thinks is an older him having a conversation. And it's very clear from the video file that him and Okino are in a relationship together. Yeah. And it's kind of like a watershed moment for him of like just coming to terms with his feelings for Okino and like accepting those. Then, of course, the kaiju come, like, blah, blah, shit's blowing up. The world is ending. So they're in a situation where he can't just like go to Okino and say anything to him. Okino ends up laying down his life, or you think he's laying down his life. What he's actually doing is they're all in a simulation. So he's just giving up his simulated form. He's actually still safe in a pod somewhere on this ship.
Okay.
He lays down his life for Tsukasa, and then his like AI or his voice or whatever, because he still exists, is in Tsukasa's mech with him as they're fighting the kaiju and they're going to this battle. So him and Tsukasa can still talk to each other. And as they go into the final battle, Tsukasa finally makes his like declaration of his feelings for Okino, which he still does in a very Tsukasa way, which is just like, he's like, I'm going to go out here. I'm going to fight for Japan. I'll give my life. He's like, and I'll give my life for you too, Okino, because I'm going to give my life for the people that I love. And Okino's like, oh, Tsukasa. And then he goes out and they fight the final fight. And you're like, oh, like, that's so cute. Like, he finally, like, he didn't flat out say, like, I love you. But a lot of the characters are, there's all these couplings in the game and they're all kind of dancing around it because they're a bunch of high schoolers, right?
Totally.
Or I guess the game makes a point at some point of being like, they're all 18.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay. Thanks for that.
Good.
So the spaceship lands, people get out of their pods, right? The game ends and they're going to go start life on this new planet. Then you get an epilogue 5 years later. It's showing you all the different characters, and all the different characters are paired up. All of these will they or won't theys that you've been watching throughout the game. All these characters you've invested in, hoping they would hook up. They're all paired up. They're having kids. They're repopulating the planet. You're like, oh, yay. Like, I'm getting what I want. Like, I'm getting this happy ending for all of these characters. And then we come to Tsukasa and Okino's fucking epilogue scene. And so the game doesn't really show any of the characters kissing or anything, but it makes it very clear all of these other characters have paired up. Instead of being like fucking Tsukasa and Okino are paired up, it does this whole weird thing where Tsukasa's bi, that's totally valid, but they go back into the simulation for fun. Like they're on the planet, but they're now able to re-enter the simulation to engage with all of the people that are saved in the simulation. And they're talking about how they're going to try to bring them into the real world. Again, we're going too far out. But anyway, they've gone back into the simulation for fun to visit all these people that they haven't seen in 5 years who only exist within the simulation.
Yeah.
Tsukasa has gone in there with one of the other like lady characters in the game, and he's like hitting on her, which is fine. No. Okay, he's bi.
Okay, sure.
Then Okino shows up. Okino shows up in the dress, starts hitting on Tsukasa. Tsukasa's getting embarrassed. And then Okino makes a comment about how, like, well, in the simulation, I can have any parts I want. And that's how they fucking end it with them. We don't get any sort of, like, final, like, they're definitely together. Like,
right. But it's also, like, this,
well, and it's the fixation on the genital, or like playing it up, and like that's supposed to be titillating.
That Okino's not a real one.
Yeah.
Even like whatever Okino's gender is valid. Like just this idea that Tsukasa, the love that he felt for Okino in the real world, we need to bring in like another woman for whom can be the woman that Tsukasa wanted. It's just like, that's kind of a slap in the face after that whole story, that journey you went through. Like, yeah, I would be really upset by the same thing.
Yeah, I felt like they got so close to giving us like, and also like, I don't know. I just like, I don't think that we needed to see Tsukasa like pairing up with one of the young women characters, because like just this whole fixation on like, oh, we're going to repopulate the planet. Like we just didn't need that. Like we could have seen that like Tsukasa and Okino's relationship was valid even in this new future where we're trying to restart humanity. It would have been really nice to still see their relationship as valid. Or if you wanted to bring in the other character of them having a three-way partnership, like I would have been fine with that too. But the way they did it, where it was also presented as though Tsukasa was like sneaking around behind Okino's back with this girl. And then Okino shows up and they make this whole thing about whether or not, he's a real woman or whatever. And that like also that would hinge on whether Tsukasa was attracted to him or interested in him, even though we've gotten all this throughout the game that made it, I thought, pretty clear that he was interested in Okino, regardless of whether Okino was, presenting as a woman or not. It was a bummer because they built up so much to that.
It's also just a damaging rhetoric that like people who are playing with a femininity or exploring femininity or have some feminine aspect within themselves that that they inherently want to have the parts that society has dictated belong to a woman. Like this idea that like and like if like I think medical and surgical transitions are totally valid, but like I just resent the concept that this character is just reduced to whether or not what's in their pants.
And like nothing in the game suggested that Okino was interested in transitioning that way, or that was how. Again, I'm using he because that's what they use in the game, though. Like because we never see anything from Okino's perspective. Like I feel like that's a missed opportunity too, to not make him one of the playable characters in the game and get inside his head more. But like we're never given any inkling that that's what he's interested in. It's literally just presented as like he's using that to titillate Tsukasa. And it just, for one thing, it didn't feel authentic to me, and it just felt like the focus was on such the wrong place. Like you had an opportunity to just to show real growth for that. Like all the other characters got a chance to grow, and yet I feel like in the epilogue didn't. The epilogues for all of the other characters felt like a good ending to their story, where you felt like they grew and they got somewhere in their relationships with each other. And we see Tsukasa and Okino, and it almost feels like they've backslid, right? Like Tsukasa, we had just seen him like actually take the step of trying to admit to Okino that he has feelings for him. And here we are 5 years later, and he's like back to still being embarrassed. Like it just is like, okay, so we just backslid. There was no real future for these two.
Right. It's like toxic masculinity sort of coming to give an excuse for Tsukasa's behavior, or like the idea that a gay man, for two men to date, one of them must want to be a woman, or one of the men must need to see the other man as a woman in some way in order for the relationship to be valid, when like this idea of who's the man and who's the woman in the relationship is not a real thing. So it feels almost like it's trying to explain itself by being like, oh, well, he's gay, but only because he fell for Okina as a woman, and now he's been tricked, and so that's what he needs to be attracted. When like the game you played, it could have been so much deeper than that. They really saw each other and loved each other as people, but it feels like we have to wrap it up in some way that just cuts out any ambiguity about gender or queerness or whatever out of the picture. Which is unfortunate.
It just felt like they were ripping something away from players that could have been a really heartwarming, fulfilling thing to see in a game, especially a game like that where so much of it is like on, we're going to restart humanity. And the idea that part of restarting humanity would be bringing queer folks along would have been a great message to have in the game. So I still think it's still a game that I really, really loved, but I just felt like, I wanted to kind of get that out because it just felt so, it was one of the, I was invested in several of the relationships, but it was one of the ones I was invested in the most. And that epilogue was just such a downer. So I wanted to talk about it here.
Wow, thank you. That I'm really interested in this game. I should try to give it a shot. Thank you for that analysis. It's like really, really interesting. This just popped in my head. Speaking of 13 Sentinels, I've just been reading about like, I know this is something we touched on last week, but yes, the game make sure we all know that the kids are all 18. But there are like these scenes where like as the characters are going into their like mecha suits and stuff where they go through these like magical transformations and their clothes disappear and it's almost like sexual. I wanted to reflect on it for a minute because I think that anime as a genre often gets held up as like, oh, it's so sexual. Like all anime is about objectifying women's bodies and, it's disgusting. Not saying like you're saying that, just there's lots of conceptions about sexuality in anime as being inherently more inappropriate or more bold than other forms of media or an expectation. And I was just thinking about, I think it was Cece, one of our previous guests, who is a narrative designer, was just tweeting about like how when we look at American games, like all of the God of War games had sex scenes in them that were very pornographic. There was a scene in The Witcher, like Geralt's feet have basically become a meme, and they're like the sexualization of women in fantasy games, like just latent sexuality in gaming isn't something that's unique to Japanese or anime games.
Not at all.
And we don't really talk about the pornography of other types of games in the same way that we criticize anime. So I thought that was a really interesting point, and I just wanted to voice it since we were talking about 13 Sentinels again, because I think it was an important just reminder for me too, because I think I tend to if I want to be titillated, I know where to go on Reddit, let's just say. So like I'm no stranger to the sexualization of anime, but I also feel like it can be unfair, I think, especially for me from an American perspective, to judge it any more than I would like American media. I mean, I think that's totally valid. And I also think that with more than just anime games, but it's, I don't know, it's just a thing with games in general. Like I want people to take games seriously because I take games seriously. And sometimes I think my own like feeling that like if there's too much tits and ass like in a game or too much excessive violence, that then other people won't take it seriously. And so I'm like preemptively critiquing something. Like 13 Sentinels is such a complicated story and such a like there's so many beautiful moments in that game, and like it impacted me so much. Like anybody should play this game. But there's also part of me that's like, if I just handed this game to somebody who doesn't play a lot of games and they get 10 minutes in and all the girl's clothes comes off when she goes in the mech, are they going to completely dismiss this game out of hand because that happened? Right. And it's like sex isn't inherently detracting from like something can have sexuality and sex in it and still be emotionally impactful and still be really important. And like sex isn't inherently detracting from the value of something. But I think what you're saying rings really true in that for someone who already doesn't see games as like a serious art form and who's coming into it and is just seeing that without the context of taking, like you see naked people in fine art in the museum and you're not like, what the fuck is this? But if you already are discounting games as not a valid art form, and then the sex is added on top, or the sexuality objectification is added on top of that, I can totally see how it could just deeper inform someone's misconceptions about what games are.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess it's just a good reminder that even as people who appreciate games, we can have those same external objectifications like in our heads, and we can be using that to critique games from that's like not even necessarily our lens. That's like what we think other people's lens will be. And so we like judge it on that. I don't know. That's interesting. Oh, great conversation per usual. But I think
and more to come.
More to come here on Pixel Therapy. I am going to go ahead and transition us over to our guest now, though. Our guest for you today is the lovely Janet Garcia, aka Gameonysus, on Twitch, Twitter, Patreon.
So excited.
Pretty much anywhere else you can find people on the internet. Janet is a game critic, content creator, Twitch streamer, podcaster, YouTuber. She does a little bit of everything.
What can't she do?
It's a great question. And until rather recently, she worked for IGN as their guides editor. But she's out on her own now, running an awesome Patreon that you should definitely check out. She'll plug that at the end of the interview and throughout. We definitely talk about her Patreon quite a bit. And I think this interview is a great pitch for why you should follow Janet. Spencer and I had such a fun time talking with her about everything from working in games media to binge watching the same TV shows over and over again for comfort, to pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and into the learning zone. She's really someone that we look up to in this space, and we were so grateful that she took some time to chat with us. So without further ado, here's our interview with Janet Garcia.
Janet, thank you so much for joining us in the virtual Pixel Therapy studio. We're so happy to have you. Typically, we ask folks to share their pronouns and just a little bit about how you spend your time.
Sure. I'm Janet Garcia. My pronouns are she, her. And for how I spend my time, it's a lot of work, a lot of gaming, a lot of streaming, editing things. And when I'm not doing that, I am trying to differentiate a lot more, because for a long time, I'm like, that is all I do. And I should probably do other things that aren't that. So I've been a distance runner for a really long time. That's been a big part of my life since I was like in my 20s, early 20s. I started learning how to play piano. I started learning how to roller skate. I'm trying to get into cooking more. So those are other ways that I like to spend my time, as well as rewatching the same sitcoms over and over again.
Feels so good. It's just like a warm blanket.
Why watch something new when I can watch something I already know is good for most of the seasons, and then I'll still just sit through the bad ones, because why not?
Thanks, brain. Just take me back there.
I call it melting my brain. Like it's like that, or like endlessly scrolling TikTok. It's like a good brain melt session. I love it.
Yeah, I guess I feel like with TikTok and streaming and Twitter and Instagram, TBH, and just the onslaught of all of the like millions of types of content that I can take in at any time, I really feel like my TV taste, especially in the past couple of years, has really just been like, I know my 3 shows. I go to TV to relax and let go, and I go to every other channel that is in my hell phone for all the other content.
What are your 3 shows?
Okay, this is really embarrassing, but it's like The Office and
classic.
It's so bad. And what else have I? My Hero Academia, because it's just I love those guys. And my 3rd show, Community.
Nice.
Yeah.
I don't hear that one a lot for like, it's such an interesting show where every episode is very like distinctly different that that's like a very chaotic comfort show, Community.
I know, it just feels like every episode you come back and rewatch, you get something, there's something new to pick up out of it, or some new reference to, there's a lot, there's layers to it. What about you? What are your kind of repeat shows?
Yeah, I got a lot of them, lean heavily on sitcoms. So How I Met Your Mother.
Oh yeah.
Like I know that show really well. Like I actually watched the pilot air on TV back when you watched like actual TV, back when TV was more than just like the name for the thing that streams stuff.
Right.
Or displays, like cast things too. So that's definitely one of them. I've been hitting Scrubs really hard lately. That's been the one I've gone back to. I also watch The Office a lot. You know, people will always make that comment of like, please stop watching The Office, just watch another show. And I'm like, no, this is what I do. Like, this is the loop. I used to hit Seinfeld pretty hard too. I haven't really gone back to that one as much, and I don't even know if it's how easy it is to stream, but I was a big proponent of getting the season DVDs for a lot of these things too. So I have like How I Met Your Mother on DVD. I think we do have The Office somewhere on DVD as well, which is kind of silly. But then as things keep moving from different streaming platforms, it's kind of nice to like say that you always have that. Oh, and Friends is a big one, even though Friends in the modern era, like it's a lot more clearly problematic than the first go. So there are some like instant skips for me in that series, but on the whole, like I really enjoy Friends, and it's interesting looking at like these sitcoms that, you know, haven't aged well in some social ways, but also in some ways where they are surprisingly progressive in certain categories, which is nice to see too, you know. Like Friends may have like a lot of very stereotypical like gender norm stuff, definitely some transphobia, as a lot of early sitcoms do, but it also has like, you know, a predominant like queer presence as well, and like all these other things that are not put in there and like to make fun of the identities, but put in there as like, hey, like this is a way of social conflict and how relationships develop and those things, which is really cool, especially for the era that show came out at. We just got that on DVD in my household, which is wild because the DVD version shows like I think what originally aired, so there's like scenes I've never seen before on this set of DVDs. So I'm kind of excited to find these new clips that got edited out, and they have like behind the scenes stuff where they talk about like, oh, we didn't have a budget to do this, so like, this is just a curtain from somewhere. Like I really get a kick out of like the little details of things from those shows as well.
How the sausage gets made.
Yeah.
Honestly, like having a DVD set, which I'm sure Jamie can relate to, because I haven't been into your house in months, Jamie, but I really appreciate how her entertainment center is like DVD, like the DVDs are part of the decor. Like I decorate
serious with all of the media that I own.
I mean, it's the entertainment / living room. Like, where else do you put it? But honestly, with the way that contracts end, like you mentioned, and the fact that, I mean, The Office, I might as well get it on DVD now because I don't want to pay for Peacock. For people who may not know the Office news, it recently moved off of Netflix, and it's now on Peacock, which is like NBC's new streaming service. And we're basically just going back to cable, but instead of paying one price for all the channels, we now get to pay for every individual channel. And it's just awesome. And so I haven't watched The Office. I guess that's why I've been forced. I even started watching Criminal Minds. That's how bad it was. Oh, no. But honestly, DVDs are like worth their weight in gold in terms of being able to just watch in perpetuity. So I mean,
you do have to get off the couch and put the DVD in the machine, though. I gotta say, sometimes that is a big hindrance. You hit the end of that disc and you're like, or I could just fall asleep.
Who needs Ring Fit? I got DVDs. Every couple hours, I get up and put in the new one. There you go.
I know one time I accidentally hit play all, and I was like, we're just gonna be here now because I'm gonna deal with this again. That's interesting too, with like how certain media players are also like diminishing. Like obviously, most of us probably don't have like dedicated DVD players, but most people use consoles. But with like this new having like discless SKUs available at the ready, like there are people that can't, you can't put your Office DVD in your PS5 because it doesn't have a slot for it. I did actually get the disc version of all that stuff. Like I'm a huge physical media fan, so I always need the option at least. The first disc I put into my PS5 was actually a DVD of a BTS concert. I'm not a BTS person. Like I'm not a K-pop person. That's no shade to the K-pop community. It's just that people always get, they're a very passionate group, for better or worse, and people always get really excited if they think that like, oh, it's you. I'm like, it's not me. It actually isn't me. It's like, no, it's my roommate, and I'm like supportive of the lifestyle.
They want to claim you.
I'm like, literally, I think I like a few of the songs from like the K-pop scene for sure, because it's some good music. And I remember tweeting out like, oh, I've been listening to like this one A-Pink song on a loop, and I had like their fans DMing me like, thank you for listening to this, ma'am. And I felt so old too. Damn, you hit me with the ma'am.
So respectful.
Like thanks, ma'am. Like
I know this K-pop ideals.
Good due diligence. But I was actually watching The Office on Netflix. on New Year's Eve. So I watched when it was no longer available, which sounds very melodramatic, but like this is a COVID New Year. Like I never really go out for New Year's Eve anyway, but we're all more at home than ever for it. So I'm like, okay. And I love doing for the holidays, putting holiday episodes on. So we tried finding anything New Year's related and just kind of tossing it on there for one last Netflix office hurrah.
That was also our New Year's Eve party.
Okay, we're in good company then. Like everyone's like a little basic, but in a way that's like, it's fine. Like I'm drinking a Mick Cafe coffee right now.
Yeah,
like,
we need basic right now.
There's no standards here. Like it's all comfort.
That's right. So Janet, this is a video game podcast, and to that end, what is your history with video games?
My history with video games, like I think a lot of like media content people, goes back very far. It goes back to a time where I'm struggling because I don't know math that well, like 1999, right? I'm a 94 kid, which is starting to get old to some, but it's still usually young to most, which is a nice place to be, I think.
What are we, like young millennials? Is that what we are?
It's like we're only old to like a few people. Though I just turned 27, and it was the first year where, being 27 now, where I feel like somebody might think of me as older. I still feel like pretty young, and I don't think 30 is like the worst thing in the world to turn, so I'm not like super dramatic over it, but I'm like, I'm kind of like veering into the other section, but then I go on shows and people will be like, I got my N64 in high school, and I'm like, I'm young, baby, baby
I'm
alert.
baby.
I'm like, I was like, do you know that like you're with me, who's like not an adult? Like, I just like I don't know if when you invited me, you were aware that like literal child, but so I've been playing games since I was about like 5 years old. My first console was the Snes Junior, which is an adorable start. And to make kind of a long story short, my brother's 6 years older than me, and he was the first one to get into games just because, I mean, at 5, you don't really have a lot of perception of anything going on. But he saw like gaming and was like, this seems cool. Like, I want an N64. And my parents were like, we're not going to get you an N64. It's so expensive. We don't even know if you're going to like this thing. Like, I don't want to spend all this money and then you're going to like not be playing it. So they're like, I'll tell you what, we'll start you with the SNES Junior, which for those who don't know, it was just like another SKU, right? We've had these multi-SKUs for a long time, and it was a smaller, slightly different design, cheaper, just sort of, it came out when the N64 was already out, so it was sort of like, who is this for? It was for parents who didn't want to buy the N64, but wanted to give their kid a game console. That was our household. So that was like our first system. We probably had that for a year or two before getting the N64, so I definitely grew up like a lot of, I think, general gamers. We get outside the bubble of people that are dedicated enough to be making content over it. Most folks aren't getting stuff at launch. Like, you usually get it a few years later. I remember growing up, I only ever really had like a dozen games for a console, maybe less, which sounds kind of wild because the consoles were expensive, but it's like, we only have like these $3 $60 games that we got like every birthday. Like, that's it. Like, if you didn't play a lot of the Sunshine, there wasn't much left. There's like Sunshine, Madden, Mario Party, Melee, Crazy Taxi. It's like, right, like there's only a handful of games that we even really had, and then of course you had a Blockbuster to kind of stretch that out a little bit, see if you could get some more experiences. But yeah, that was basically my general history. I did have moments where I stopped gaming as well, which I think a lot of people have had. If you haven't had it, it's kind of nice to have, I think, a break. It feels less overwhelming, and it also is a reminder of like that I like the thing, like stepping away from it and coming back. So around the Wii era, I kind of fell off of games because that was the era of motion controls, the era of predominant shooters, and I was always like a platformer person, and I didn't like first-person games, so I sort of looked around the gaming space and felt like, I think my time here is sort of done, at least for now, and I pretty much stepped away. I still had consoles and would play, like, my PS3 sometimes, but it wasn't until, after high school into college that like we're talking about basic, I watched Indie Game the movie and was like, there's all these like indie games, like as if indie games didn't exist before then, but like, hey, I'm here now, so it's okay, right? Like that was the movie that introduced a lot of people, myself included, to that space. So I had my MacBook in college, and I played Super Meat Boy on that with the keyboard. That's my claim to fame. I beat that game with the keyboard of a MacBook, so I think that was pretty cool. Don't know why I just didn't connect a controller. It wasn't that hard, but I had trouble getting the Bluetooth to work, so I was like, we're just gonna ride this out. And I played a lot of games on Steam. Like I was one of those like humble bundle people that has now like, 800, 600 games that you've never installed, but like one day, right? And yeah, that was kind of the experience. And then as I got towards the end of college, I finally got, or maybe after graduating, I finally got a PS4. And I sort of at that point was like all the way back in. I would say I got all the way back in towards the end of college where I, start with this kind of getting into, I guess, my career as well. But yeah. I came back in when I started writing. Like I sort of realized I hadn't played games in a while, and I'm like, oh, I think, I've always loved writing. Like I've loved writing since I was like in 7th grade. I did poetry, I did blogs, like I had a blog all through college. And I'm like, I think writing about games could be a fun way to like meld these two passions that I have and sort of get back into the gaming space. So I started writing for free for just a mobile game site. And for me, it wasn't, the reason I didn't really care about it being free is I'm like, I'm literally just doing this for fun and like, oh, and I get some codes sometimes, sure. And that was my first sort of experience coming back into games through coverage. So I do think a lot of my game passion comes from the experience of doing coverage. And that's sort of what I think keeps me coming back. But as that grew, I got, deeper into games, I got deeper into media. And that just continued until I am now here, very, very heads down in both of those factors and aspects.
Yeah, awesome. And speaking of here, for folks who may not know, Janet has, what'd you call Gameonysus, like your tag?
Yeah, I've gotten that question before. It's something I've asked myself as well. I would say it is my handle and my brand, which I feel like sounds kind of extra, but it's a lifestyle brand, it's a way to live.
It's a lifestyle.
Yeah, it's a lifestyle. No, that sounds so pretentious. But yeah, I would say it's my handle and my brand. Like people ask like, oh, so do I go by that? And like, I do and I don't. Like that is my handle. And usually when I do content, I just say I'm Janet Garcia, aka Gameonysus, just so that people kind of connect the two. It's like the umbrella of underneath all of it. So I am kind of that. In a way, it's a persona, but it's not a persona in the like TI versus TIP sense where it's like, or, Beyonce versus Sasha Fierce. It's not like any of that kind of thing. It's a lot more melded than that, but that is a way to think about it that isn't entirely like off base.
Word. Okay, so Janet, your persona, Gameonysus, inspired by the god of wine. I love how you write that the name is a nod to your love of mythology, but also reflects your overall goal, not of being necessarily the greatest gamer in the universe, but rather you say, I want my gaming experiences and the content I create to be a universe, expansive, beautiful, curiosity-driven, and inspiring. And I just wanted to ask, like, what inspires you about video games? Like, what drives you to keep making this content? What draws you to them?
I think all the layers of games is what really inspires me and gets me coming back. I love when things finally click. In certain spaces of the internet and certain perceptions, I think people do see me as like a little bit negative because I can be very critical of games. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, like to me, good criticism is finding the best in the worst games and the worst in the best games. So I think that is also why I sometimes come off that way, because I would talk a lot about like big, AAA things. And I'm like, okay, well, let's look at the ways that this is kind of like not that good. But versus, I can play these little, small experiences. Maybe the art is like not that great or like whatever, but I can find like certain things that I really appreciate in it or value in it. Even if it's not maybe the greatest, experience in the world, or, it was like, oh, this is something someone, I played people's games on itch and they're like, oh man, like this was for a jam. You weren't supposed to play this. Like, please don't. But I find a lot of cool stuff in that. God, there's so much I love about games. I like how they can be enjoyed on a lot of different levels. There's the visual, the sound, the story, but then there's also like the different things that make you have an enjoyable time or an enriching experience. So there are times in games where I'm like, man, I love that this is like kind of stupid, like I love how dumb, like I love like silly stuff, cute stuff. Like one recent game that I played that I was really into was Fogged. It's on Game Pass on Switch. And it's just like you're just like a long dog and you just control these different parts of the puzzle game. And admittedly, I think, there's definitely room for growth in terms of the structure and how the physics work and stuff. Like it's probably more like maybe a 7-ish kind of level if I was rating it. But man, I love the hell out of it because it just felt so joyful and silly. And it scratched an itch. It created a spark for me that I don't always get when I'm playing a game. So for me, I kind of like chasing those special moments. I think, games like any art, it's hard to make good art. Like, it's like something exceptional, like across all the things that are being made. That's super rare. And I think, there's nothing wrong with seeing it that way. It makes finding it that much more exciting, playing a lot of things that like don't hit for me. One, helps me appreciate the stuff that does hit. And two, you just learn so many connective threads in the designs and the stories of games. That's one thing that I'm really chasing, trying to be an expert by playing a lot, because you can start to make connections and see things in ways that you didn't before. I was recently streaming The Medium as part of my latest games that came out, like Best of 2021 watch. And right off the bat, I'm like, okay, the protagonist is giving me Control vibes. The camera's giving me old school Resident Evil. The adventure structure is giving me Don't Nod. Like, I'm sort of, and obviously sometimes that can be, taken to an extreme where every tagline is like, this is the blah, blah, blah of this, or like this, it's Super Mario for people that like puzzles. And it's like, what does that mean? And honestly, it gets a little silly. It's like, it's the crazy taxi of visual novels. Like, okay, is that NeoCab a little bit? Like,
I want to play that.
And, that kind of get a little silly, and obviously comparisons aren't always the best thing, but it helps sort of see like, okay, how does this work in this context, or doesn't work, or what makes this special, or okay, they were going for this and did they succeed in capturing it? Is Bug Snacks a better Pokemon Snap than Pokemon Snap's going to be? Like, I don't know. I'm interested to find out. So I really love like all those elements, as well as just, I don't know, talking to people about games, doing this is probably my favorite part of it all, like the content part of it, the discussion part of it. And I think that's what I really like about streaming, because it's all happening immediately and live, and I get to like just to kind of speak the stuff I would be thinking anyway and like turn it into content. And it's always great when you can just turn something that you really already wanted to do into like, okay, this is something that like is shareable and like, profitable and sustainable and like livable, and you can kind of sort of make stuff that you already kind of were going to want to make, which is sort of how like I got into games media to begin with. Like, I came in not looking for a career. I just wanted to do this. And then I'm like, but what if I could do this and also make money, which is hard to do, but I'm working on it as I think a lot of us are.
So what you were saying about, how drawing comparisons may not always be the best thing, and it can get kind of ridiculous the level at which you could do that. I mean, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier when we go back to the same sitcoms, the same shows. Like, our brains love patterns. Our brains find comfort in patterns. If you're going to invest 40, 60, 200 Persona 5 hours into a game, like, you want to know what you're getting into. And so, I don't know, I just think that it's an interesting parallel, the fact that we kind of look for threads of things that are familiar and feel good to us in others. And there's delight in finding those callbacks and references. Like, I mean, the nature of code and software design is very iterative and building upon what was there before. So I kind of love that games are very interconnected in this way. Before the pandemic, a big part of gaming, like, I recently moved in with my partner, so it's a little bit different now. But when I lived with roommates, like, I would always be gaming. I'd either be watching someone game, or I would be gaming and someone would be watching me, and we would just hang out and talk, and that would be hanging out. And like, Jamie, I've gone over to your house and we've spent countless hours, me just watching you play something while we chat. And like, it's just a very comforting, soothing activity. And I really love that aspect of streaming, of sort of reaching across space and time and bringing folks together in something that is intimate, but can also be like fun and easygoing. It could be a lot of things. Like, I know a lot of people get mental health support from streaming or find community in streaming. I know for me, I'm very, very scared of Resident Evil. So I got the chance to watch you play Maiden instead of having to do it myself. And that was great for me personally. And
I'm glad. Thank you for being there.
I just love the way that it really opens that door. And for you, like, you spoke about this a little bit already, but what are you trying to bring your streamers with your channel? Like, what do you want to provide with your content? Yeah,
so there's a couple things with that. I think specifically with how I'm approaching streaming now, where I'm mostly a variety streamer with a little bit of an emphasis on Animal Crossing, but not enough of an emphasis to be like the Animal Crossing streamer. Because those people are like doing a lot of stuff and their islands look really nice. And I'm like, that's not what we're doing here. We're doing something else. But I think a little bit of comfort, I think, from the Animal Crossing streams. Though it's funny because I'll watch other Animal Crossing streamers and I'm like, oh, wow, this is so soothing. And then like there's myself and I'm like, I have like this like slightly deeper voice and I'm sort of just like, and then people will say like, oh, this is like just came in for like this cozy, soothing stream. I'm like, this is me literally like swearing as I pick up this field of flowers that just ran amok. So, but I think I am aiming for a little bit of coziness, a little bit of togetherness. It's sort of, I guess Animal Crossing does fit in with the other games I play in the sense that a lot of my approach is, hey, do you like games? But let's be real. We ain't trying to play all these games. Like, it's like gaming's a lot of like downloading, but then not getting to it and a lot of, backlogs and guilt. So this is okay. You don't have to play that. Just come watch me play the game. It's the same. It's the same difference. And you can sort of, maybe check out stuff, see if you're interested in it, experience something you like again, get a taste of something. I had some people like with not the maiden stream, the medium. They all have like similar names.
Right, yeah.
With the medium, like I had one of my community members coming in and then they're like, okay, well, you're at the part that I got to, so like I'm going to leave because like I don't want the spoilers. And then they came back and were like, I came back to see if you got stuck at this part too. And I was like at the part that we were both stuck at, and like little stuff like that's really cool. So, everyone comes to streams and just general gaming content for different things. For me, my experience with engaging with other people's content and creating content has always been to sort of have a form of conversation, even if it's not the kind of conversation we're having now, where like you're here and I'm here and we can all like directly respond and talk. But like I loved podcasts so much, like getting into games where I could play something and then like listen to it. And it sort of have you ever seen that meme of the kid eating the yogurt by the poster of the other kids eating it was like the ice cream or whatever, and they're laughing with like the poster of the people laughing? That's absolutely how I feel listening to podcasts. I will be, and sometimes I get so into them, I'm like, oh, like I like want to like respond and like sometimes I'll just at them on Twitter, but then I'm like, let me leave them alone because like that's probably too much. But yeah, I get really into that, and I think being able to create that space for people to engage at the level that they feel like they want to. So it's like, okay, well, I'm here. I'm always talking on stream. Lurkers are welcome, but like literally, like you want to talk to me, I'm here. You want to like hit me up on Twitter, I'm here. Like I really try my best to respond to everybody that I get because I'm also small enough that like it's somewhat feasible. Like I can understand someone like, who's crazy famous. Maybe it's just literally not possible without like a marketer person or something. But I'm like, look, it's not that deep. I get 5 comments on this thing, 100 on like a TikTok. It's like, I can take the time to go in here. And like, it really does mean a lot when people take the time to respond to my work. That's something that like, as it's such a big deal to me, so I'm kind of looking to create those kind of spaces and be the person playing the games that you were too lazy to play. That's also that in my content. If you choose to use it for utilitarian purpose, like deciding on what you want to play.
Word. Love that. And something else that I really respect about you is your specialization, if we can call it that, in writing guides. So you were the associate guides editor at IGN for a while. You also run a website called Gameindustryguides.com, which is chock full of awesome advice for folks looking to break into the industry. I guess I feel like it takes a special person to write guides, especially considering how massive and full of secrets and Easter eggs video game worlds can be. Like, it's just like, how can just thinking about trying to write a guide for like Assassin's Creed Valhalla makes me want to curl in a ball and cry. And you've written guides for everything from Pokemon Sword and Shield to The Last of Us Part 2, really out here doing the Lord's work. And I'm just wondering, like, so as someone who writes a lot of guides, like, is guide writing more of an art or a science? Like, how do you even approach that?
Ooh, that's a great question. I'm going to go with science, but like from a scientist that has empathy. So like we all know about like doctors or scientists that have like no like people skills or like social emotional intelligence levels. So I do think you, even though I think I know guides writers who would be like, I don't have any social emotional intelligence, but I'm like, you're just being self-deprecating. But yeah, I think you do need to have a little bit of empathy, because one important part of doing guides is you need to be able to write for the best players and the worst players. You have to write for the person who's stuck on a thing that they're now realizing wasn't even a puzzle and that they just feel a little bit dumb. And you have to write for someone who is like, I want to do the hard mode of Final Fantasy VII Remake. Shout out to the people that actually wrote that hard mode guide, because that wasn't me. I can't do that. I don't have the ability. And that's the other thing too. Like, I was so intimidated to write guides before I started writing them. I honestly got into guides writing by accident / out of desperation. I really wanted to work at IGN and any of the big outlets, really, as I was building my portfolio. And they're like, well, for freelance, we have we have some guide space. And I'm like, oh, sure. But I'm like, oh no. But it's the classic, and you want to do this within reason. Like, I want to caution people, never do something that you genuinely can't do. Like, there are things I genuinely cannot do. Like, if you want, a certain production level on a video, that might be out of my scope. Or if you want, there are, you do got to know your space, but you also have to be willing to kind of push a little bit outside. I have an education background, so that's actually called, if you study educational philosophy and stuff, there is Vygotsky's zones of proximal development. And in the middle of the circle, there's the stuff you can do. And outside that, there's the stuff you can do with help, or the stuff that kind of challenges you. And then beyond that is the stuff you just straight up can't do. And the goal is to be in that middle, because that's where learning takes place. So I think that's kind of what I mean by, I didn't really know if I could do this. And then I just kind of went into it. It wasn't totally out of my scope, but it was a little bit. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to do this, because I want to write for IGN. I want to build my portfolio and have these big outlets. And I did grow to have a real joy and appreciation for it. That being said, I don't personally see myself going back to do guides. Life's long, so I don't want to say anything super concrete. And I find that the universe, when I say sweeping declarations, I'm never going to do guides, I end up doing them. So I don't want to say anything too definite. But what you grow to appreciate is in helping people and providing a service, and also doing a level of teaching. For me, having an ed background, a guide is really just a direction set. You are giving information. Obviously there's different forms of guides. There's tips and tricks and breakout pieces, and you do videos and companions, and you can make graphics for things. There's a lot of ways to convey information, but I really try to write for the highs and the lows of it, making things very skimmable, because the reality is the worst thing is when you're trying to find one specific answer and you can't within this long page, this long YouTube video you're scrubbing through. It's okay, I just need to get this answer so I can keep going. So many times people do come to guides from a point of frustration. So yeah, so I would say it's a science, but you need to have a little bit of that people element, because you also need to be good enough where you can figure out what people might have trouble with, which is actually where if you feel a little bit insecure about your gaming abilities, which I definitely did as someone that stepped into a guides team with people that were really great at games. Part of that can be helpful, because if you got stuck on something and you figured it out, good, you now know everyone's going to get probably stuck on that same thing, and you can kind of write it in a certain way, and you can start to see, okay, this person's going to be searching this thing. And then we get kind of more into the business of optimizing on Google and stuff like that. But that stuff is helpful, because you can figure out those things. And there are definitely pages that I made really in depth, and I'm I don't know if anyone else had a hard time with this, but I did. And I never know how much of an impact that makes, but I remember getting to the end of Control, a game that is a little challenging, but I didn't find ridiculously hard. I wouldn't characterize that game as hard, but the end of it, it just had this long sequence of enemies that it just took me forever to do. So I wrote a really in-depth page, because I had to learn how to cheese it. If you're kind of bad at games, that's good, because you will learn how to cheese stuff. You will find the point in the log in Metro Exodus where you can just shoot the bear in the face because the developers put that one pixel there, and that stuff is gold. So yeah, if you can cheese stuff, let's go. I love a good cheesing. I love just kind of jankily getting my way through areas. So all that stuff's really valuable in that space for sure.
Word. So for anyone out there who wants to be a guides editor, if you're a bad gamer, it's going to help you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, on this show, we really like to focus on the emotional connections that people form with video games. And so we like to ask folks to talk about a specific game that was significant to them or influenced their life in a certain way. You shared with us that Super Mario 64 had an impression on you as an early gaming memory, a game that you still love, and a lesson in learning to do the things you can't do at first. And so I guess to start, even though Super Mario 64 is pretty iconic, how would you describe this game in a couple sentences to someone who'd never heard of it?
Ooh, it's a Mario game, if you're familiar with Mario.
He's a guy, little plumber.
Yeah, red hat. Hat's important. It is a 3D platformer. I believe now I'm like questioning if it's a sandbox. I believe it's a sandbox because you have these different worlds you can enter into, and essentially your goal is to collect these stars, and you have different worlds. They all have different stars. It has a little bit of there's some mystery and some surprises there, but that is basically the summation of the game that I would provide.
Beautiful. And tell us about your relationship with Super Mario 64.
Yeah, Super Mario 64, I mean, it is like the iconic game of the N64. I think, I would argue it's the first game people think of when they think of the N64, unless you're one of those GoldenEye people, and then, no one likes that guy. So.
Yeah, don't be that guy.
Yeah, let's not. Like, it's not fun to play now. Like, I'm not having a good time. Like, why are we doing this? No, so much shade to GoldenEye though. But anyway, it is one of the iconic games that you think of for that console, and for good reasons. It is very much, I think, a masterpiece in its time. I think it actually still holds up as very close to such. I mean, some control issues for sure. But yeah, it was like just like a wonderful experience. And for me, that was like one of the games that I most vividly remember from my childhood. Obviously it's really hard to remember all of those years, especially when you're really young. And I don't have a lot of super concrete gaming memories, which is a shame because I now love games. So I wish I knew like my first game for sure, but I don't. Like, what
was my taste back then?
But, yeah, right. Like, what was I in? Who was that person? I have very little clue. It was probably just whatever games we had. But I had Yoshi's Island early on, and Mario 64 was one of the first, I guess, bigger games I can remember finishing. It's not like a terribly long game, but there's multiple areas, a couple like key boss battles, like mini bosses. It sort of has a lot of traditional structure and what I think we consider to be the modern current platforming hallmarks. We got collectibles, we got a couple secrets, we got some bosses, we have these stars, we have collectibles that are related to the stars. So it sort of hits on all of those points. And as a result, it was like one of the first like fully fledged gaming experiences that I really remember having and also struggling with. I had some struggles with Yoshi's Island as well, but Mario's interesting in that it's like, well, it's 3D, so it's like a totally different space. And also some of the elements can be quite challenging. I mean, that game got ported to Switch this year in the form of the All-Stars collection, and I'm sort of slowly playing through pieces of it now. Like my family's just sharing one file and we're kind of getting the stars, but we also stopped doing that, so I don't know if we're gonna finish. But and even as an adult who like has made a living in games media and things, like there are still stars that I'm like, man, this star's kind of a bitch, this is hard to get. So as a child, certainly like there were a lot of struggles there, and like a lot of games, Mario 64 teaches you mechanics very intentionally because they're like, hey, you're going to need to know this. So like, I'm making you do it so that you know it. And, I had an older brother and he would definitely step in and help me with certain things. But, we also know that sometimes when you get something done, you don't actually know how to do it. You just kind of like got lucky and you can't replicate it. And that was the case with a lot of like Mario 64 with like, I think the crouch jumps and like the wall kicks and things like, it's hard to really coordinate that when you're younger, especially. And I would avoid a lot of stuff. I'm like, this is good enough. Okay. Or we just won't get that star. Cause you also have the option. You don't have to get everything in the game to beat it. But then sure enough, at one point, we get to this point where you literally need to do this. It's not optional. And they're going to ask you to use the one mechanic you've been avoiding. Or like, oh, actually, this boss is centered on this like long, even though I don't think any boss actually is. They're pretty simple, but like this long jump or something. Or to win this race, you have to be able to do the triple jump or something like that. And I'd be like, damn, I guess, there's no avoiding it now. Like the chickens have come to roost, right? It's saying, like, it's time to deal with this. Like, you avoided this for so long, and it's time. And I think what I love about that is that's a lot of what life is. Like, you can put off things, but chances are you're going to need to figure it out at one point. Or, sometimes you can't avoid stuff forever, but then it makes your life less enriching. That's something I'm kind of going through now, like going back to the mentioning other things I do like piano and skating. Like I had tried to get into music for so long and failed so many times. I bought so many instruments. I mean, I had like a guitar and I got rid of the guitar, then I got a ukulele, I got rid of that, then I got another one. I still don't know how to play it. Like it's just been this whole thing. And it's like these big hurdles. And then when you start to, what's interesting too, is when you start to look at it and unpack it, you see what the problem really is. So like with me and like music or skating or doing all these things, like the problem is I don't have confidence in that vertical. And if you dig deeper, okay, maybe I have other confidence issues in general that like, okay, now we got a whole thing to unpack, right? And like it's kind of okay, you're forced to face up to this through this. And that's what's great about like sports and music, like their performances, there are things you have to do. There's clear rights and wrongs, and like there's only execution or failure, and you have to like accept that and live with it and work through it. And in moments in that game, there are those moments as well where it's like, okay, well, there's only one way to do this, and you need to get it done correctly to continue. And being forced to face that and overcome it, I think that's something I'm still very much learning now. And a lot of my early gaming memories were definitely underscored by fear. Like I had a fear of boss battles. I still kind of have a fear of boss battles, to be honest. I'm like, oh God, like it's like the standardized test of games is kind of how I refer to it. But I was always so scared about like, and again, it was like that performance anxiety. So it's like, oh, you've actually had performance anxiety since you were like freaking 5, and like, you know, get over it. Like get over it. And I'm like still working on getting over it, but those were like my early moments of, and I think I'm obviously a lot better than I am emotionally and intellectually than when I was 5, but like that was part of like experiencing that. And a lot of my childhood through games and through other activities, you know, it kept coming back to that same thing of like getting good at being comfortable in fear and learning how to execute through that has been like a big life lesson. I think games have a lot of those little like life lesson moments. Like I think games and sports and like other performance-based things like are so good at teaching you how to, well, forcing you to deal with things emotionally. Now, how good you are at dealing with that, well, that's going to be, you know, that's how we get rage quitters and people that are like really toxic in games or have like really, or like, you know, people even that I know as friends or peers or talk about like, oh, like, when did you break a controller out of anger? I'm like, I never broke a controller out of anger because one, I never got that angry.
Can't afford that.
Some of y'all didn't grow up poor. Yes, I'm like, like, the Wavebird, we're not getting another one, okay? We already have, like, the multiplayer, someone's playing on the Mad Cats already, so we can't break this, like, you know, that first DualShock or whatever, the I guess it wasn't the DualShock at the time, but whatever. Y'all know what I'm talking about. It's like, there's no... You're upset, you calmly walk over and turn that thing off because you don't want to drain that back. You're not getting another one either. This has to last the whole time.
If I break this controller, the next thing to get broken is going to be my face. Like, oh, speaking of fears, like games helping you get over fears. I feel like dungeons were a big thing for me. Like I've always been scared of the dark, but like Skyrim especially, I think, kind of forced me to confront that sometimes you have to do dungeons. Like Skyrim's this like open world RPG game, but it has a lot of like going down into dark and dingy caves and going down into the abandoned ruins of ancient civilizations. And I don't know, I wouldn't call it claustrophobia, but I really just don't like not being able to see the sky in games, or like having to do long underwater traversal is like not always great. But Mario had a lot of that too. Like you had to go down to the bowels of that castle and like jump to these flipping paintings and shit. Like it gets kind of scary.
There's that it's like an eel, right? That like eel in the water that like comes out. If it's like the one. That thing's horrifying. It still looks scary now, because what's funny too about like those older games, like, you know, I know some people are like don't really see as much value in like playing older stuff in the modern era, which I can understand. Like it's a very different experience, but like some of those graphical or performance limitations just created something that you'll never see again. Like that thing's horrifying, and it would not, like if you made the Odyssey version of that, I mean, it would look cooler, but like it would not be nearly as scary because it was so sharp with those little polygons. Super scary.
Yeah. And okay, so like speaking of scary and like Super Mario 64, first of all, like I definitely
piano's scary too.
And also just the opening screen. Like I have very strong like light body horror memories of like you could totally like manipulate Mario's face in the menu, and you could like pull his lips and eyelids and stuff everywhere. So like that stands out strongly in my memory. And I don't know if you were familiar with this, but I was reading this Polygon article. It came out in September 2020 by Patricia Hernandez. And it was about how in 2020, Super Mario 64 has kind of been, there's this trend on YouTube of kind of like overlaying like old VHS effects and analog film on sort of the old gameplay screenshots or videos and making it look like creepypasta kind of stuff, like adding spooky layers. And it kind of just emphasizes like the base layer spookiness of the game. I wanted to just read this quick quote because I feel like it captures it pretty well. But Patricia writes, "It's a weird game, half Alice in Wonderland drug trip, half kids cartoon," says game designer Sam Barlow, who's behind Her Story and Telling Lies. According to Barlow, Super Mario 64 is, quote, "just weird enough that you might see malevolence out of the corner of your eye. Gorgeous screen fields above, demonic dungeons below. Chirpy dinosaurs 1 minute, non-Euclidean ghost houses the next. It's full of fake walls and magical paintings, optical illusions we'd never seen before in 3D. It's a game that really loves to poke at the fabric of its own illusion." Patricia writes, "Above all, Super Mario 64 has given rise to a series of scary stories because it hails from an area in which there was still a palpable sense of the unknown. Unlike modern games, we don't have patch notes listing out every single change and inclusion, nor do we have data miners who can tell us about every single file within a title." And so it's just kind of speaking to the fact that like people are able to kind of draw out these creepy scenes from it, but also that we have this kind of collective memory of it as kind of a little bit unsettling, having that kind of emptiness to it that those early games have before we really were fleshing out NPCs and making things super immersive. So I'm just wondering, like, as you look back on it, and especially since you were playing it again this past year on the Switch, like, did you have any shift in perspective in how you thought about it?
I feel like it's a little difficult to answer if I shifted in how I thought about it. I think I did realize that, like, okay, some of this is not as perfect as I like remembered it. Even though it hadn't been that long since I actually played it. I replayed Super Mario 64 only a few years ago on the original like N64. So it wasn't like that old of a memory for me as like maybe for other people who hadn't played since childhood. But yeah, it was clear that like some of the camera's rough, you know, like this is difficult. Or even like trying to, Mario 64 does kind of suffer from you have an idea, but you're incapable of executing on it because of the system that is requiring you to execute on it, which is the worst feeling to have in a game. But other than that, what I really noticed the most from Super Mario 64 is trying to like chase and reignite a memory I had in order to serve me today. So like a lot of playing it, and I think I did actually look up a guide for maybe one of the things because I'm like, I don't know how the hell to do this, or like if maybe I can't do it yet because I don't have like the ability or something, because there's different abilities in the game, like caps you can get. But like trying to figure out, wait, like I thought I could do that, like the penguin race specifically. I'm like, wait, he knows I cheated? I thought I was supposed to cheat. Like, why is this wall here if I'm not supposed to?
Yeah.
Like things like that, and trying to remember like, oh wait, I think in this star like you can do this, but in this other one you like can't do it or something. And sort of trying to figure those things out. And it's been interesting too, because like, you know, I think that quote from Sam Barlow is so good. And damn, like Sam Barlow's a good writer, but it makes sense because those games are good. So like, you know, not shocking, but it really is like very much that poking at its own like mystery and that fabric, because even in like that winter area, there are, for the red coins thing, there are like teleportation spots that have no like marker or no, like there's no notice on how that you can do that. You just have to like know, you know, it's like, and there's a little bit of like, okay, the bridge ends here. So it's sort of like this like spooky different thing. There's no explanation for it either. It's like, it doesn't fit in with the rest of the area. But there's a lot of like stuff like that. And I think one thing that I do enjoy about Mario 64 is, even though it's not every time, a lot of times if you have an idea, it's like, oh, can I do this? And it does work that way. I do like that there are multiple ways to like solve a singular problem, or to traverse a singular area in Mario 64. Yeah, like it's just such a good game. And I think it just provides like, when you were talking about like emptiness and, you know, maybe like a lack of NPCs or a different kind of presence, there's just enough space for you to not really feel like super overwhelmed or like cluttered by things. But yeah, it's just a chaotic, interesting, weird ass game. But there were a lot of weird games at the time, like, right, Banjo-Kazooie, you could like turn into an ant and stuff like immediately. So there was a lot of like mysticism going on in that era. But yeah, it just felt like what I love about Mario 64 is it's so joyous and pure and iconic for what it, you know, the groundwork it laid for games today. You know, we talked about finding those connective threads. There are so many there. And I think with like a game like Mario 64, where it's a childhood game for a lot of us, or at least like a youthful game, like even people that are older in games media are often still young enough to like, maybe they're in school to some degree, even if it's college, like they're in some form of school, or they're like just getting going with life. So there's a certain kind of desire to also connect to that emotional thread as well in addition to the mechanical one.
100%. Janet, it has been awesome hanging out with you for this past hour. Thank you. Where can folks follow you online, support you? And are there any projects that you have coming out soon or that you want folks to know about?
People can find me online at Gameonysus. That's Gameonysus. I am on everything under that. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, TikTok, Clubhouse. I just joined Clubhouse. I still don't understand how it works. That's my LinkedIn also, Gameonysus. It's like literally everything. So, and it's my website, my like portfolio website that kind of has a hub of a bunch of different ways to find my work. And the main thing I'm working on is just stuff for my Patreon. So that's patreon.com/Gameonysus. I have a bunch of different tiers of incentives and things. But of course, if you can't support that way, you can support through just like follows and shares and being present. It means so much to me that people give me money to do the work I do. Like that blows my mind. But it equally blows my mind that people like are there supporting in like all these other ways too, that in some ways can even be more impactful depending on how you want to look at it. And it means a lot to me that people so often as well are like, oh, like, I'm really sorry that like I can't really like give anything. I'm like, dude, I can't give anyone anything either. That's why I have this Patreon. So like, first of all, like it's all good. Like I feel the same way about like creators that I love, but like it's so cool that people want to even do that. And like, I don't know, it's like so special to me. So that's what's going on there. Stay tuned on YouTube because I do plan on doing more video content than just my weekly podcast, which is Gameonysus Weekly on all platforms. I will start to be doing previews and reviews soon. I'm slowly rolling in back that written content. I absolutely love streaming. It's been a great break on my hands too, to not be writing all day, every day. But I'm so excited to be doing like feature articles and listicles and like kind of turning that content into, you know, something that's you can just quickly go back to or keep track of and having that pillar as well. So stay tuned for announcements on that where I roll out my own like blog style thing where I can kind of put all of that content because I'll be working on that really soon.
Beautiful. Can't wait. Janet, thank you so much for joining us on Pixel Therapy.
Thanks for having me.
Time is up for today's session of Pixel Therapy. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope that listening to our thoughts and feelings gave you some thoughts and feelings of your own. If you want more Pixel Therapy, come check us out at patreon.com/pixeltherapypod, where you can snag that monthly bonus episode for just $2 a month, plus opportunities to get involved with the community and influence the show directly. If you're not up for contributing monetarily, but you enjoyed this episode, there are lots of ways you can support us for free, including leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts and following us on Instagram and other social media at Pixel Therapy Pod. That stuff is just as important, and we appreciate it just as much. Remember that Pixel Therapy is a happy member of the But Why Though Podcast Network, so you can support us by supporting them and heading over to butwhythoughpodcast.com. That's though with a THO. Take a peek at the inclusive geek community they are building around pop culture news reviews and kick-ass podcasts like yours truly. And you can keep up with all of this stuff and more by visiting our website at pixeltherapypod.com.
Finally, since we like to put our money and our energy where our mouth is, we end every episode with a recommended side quest. This week's side quest is the Black Resilience Fund. Thank you so much to Janet for the recommendation. The Black Resilience Fund is an emergency fund dedicated to fostering healing and resilience by providing immediate resources to Black Portlanders. They write, "We need healing, we need justice, and that requires action." This fund was intended to provide immediate relief from financial burdens for basic living expenses and life emergencies for Black Portlanders. Their primary categories are warm delivered meals and groceries, support for small businesses, and also in the form of education loans, bill support for utilities, phone and internet, rent support, credit card debt support, medical, transportation, and even moving costs. The Black Resilience Fund was founded by Cameron Witten and Salome Chimuku in June 2020 and has since grown into a nonprofit organization supported by a small core staff and a team of local volunteers. Find out more and donate to the fund at blackresiliencefund.com.
Thank you for that side quest, Spencer. That is our show for today. So go forth, run a story mission, level up some stats, and don't forget to hug an NPC every now and then. We'll be back soon with some more Pixel Therapy. Bye-bye.